If you are considering buying a Fuji medium format digital camera, then you are faced with a decision. You're going to have to choose between the GFX50s and the GFX50r. I have both of those cameras here, along with this small bird that I'm bird sitting for a friend. And I've tried putting her on her cage and she just keeps flying back over here, so I'm just going to let her sit here. Anyway, in this video I'm going to assume that you have made the decision to buy a medium format camera and you've made the decision to buy a Fuji, and so now you're trying to decide, do you want the 50R or the 50S? It's a hard decision, I got to tell you. These are about $1,000 apart, so that might make the decision for you right there. I was surprised when I pulled the 50R out of the box. I've had the 50S for a little over a year now, and when the 50R came out, I thought, wow, you know, it would be great to have that level of image quality in a smaller, lighter camera. These two cameras offer identical image quality. There's no difference there, which is too bad because that might make the decision easier, but you're not going to be able to get away by considering image quality. Same sensor, same processing, same images out of both cameras. So I was surprised when I pulled this out of the box and found that, in a way, it seems larger than the 50S. It is narrower, it doesn't have this big butt thing on the back that this one has, but it's wider. And it just somehow looks bigger to me when it's sitting on the table. It is lighter. I put them on my scale and it weighs in around 110, 115 grams lighter than the 50S. That's not very much. If you want to know how much that is, I can tell you that the battery charger for either of these cameras weighs more than that without a battery in it. So it's not a huge weight change. You can feel it when you're holding both of them side by side, but it's not a real slam dunk weight issue because the two cameras are balanced differently. This camera is a little more heavy on the back. It wants to tilt backwards, which when you're feeling them side by side makes this feel heavier. But then when you put a lens on it, it feels maybe a little more balanced than this one does. So it's tricky. You're not going to be able to say this camera is definitely worth buying over this one because it weighs less. Weight is not really so much of an issue, and I would argue neither is size. There are some control differences. The 50S has an ISO dial, the 50R does not, but the 50R has this cool ring around the edge, and you can program this, and one of the things you can program it for is ISO. I've got it set up that way. I really like working this way. I like it better than the ISO dial because I can change ISO without taking my eye from the viewfinder. So that's a real plus for this camera. Balancing it out, this camera has an exposure compensation dial, this camera does not. On the one hand, I just really like having the dedicated dial, and I can most of the time work it okay with my thumb. On the other hand, with this camera, I press this button, turn this dial on the back, and I've got exposure compensation. I can do that very easily without taking my eye from the viewfinder. So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another there. I do not have on the back of this camera the 4-way button pad that I have on this camera, but both cameras offer this joystick, which works just as well as any of these other buttons. The 50S joystick feels a little larger or something. I feel like it's a little bit easier to use, but I'm really splitting hairs at that point. It really doesn't matter that much. And as far as the lack of the 4-way, of the little D-pad, the 50R still has so many other programmable buttons that you can really configure it for the way that you want. So control layout really doesn't feel like that big of an issue to me. They both have their strengths. They both have their weaknesses. I have heard or read some people online saying they thought that the 50R, that the build quality wasn't as good, that the buttons felt cheaper, that it just didn't feel like as high-end a camera. I have not felt that. I feel like the build quality is pretty much identical on both cameras. They both feel great. The controls are sturdy, they give very nice tactile response. I really like both of them. A couple of things that bother me about the 50R in terms of its physical design. The battery is bottom loading. On this, it's a side loading battery. I really think of this as a studio camera, and I like being able to set it on a tripod, and if I need to swap batteries, take it out through the side. Similarly, the USB port is on the bottom of this camera. If you don't have the right kind of mount, or tripod plate and tripod head, you may not be able to tether this camera while it's on a tripod. What's even weirder is because it's on the bottom, Fuji is worried that the cable might fall out. So they give you this weird little gizmo that holds it in place. It really makes me feel like Fuji's intention with this is that you're not going to use it in the studio as much. This is maybe a street shooting camera in their mind. It certainly follows the XE3 rangefinder design. It looks like it's a kind of Godzilla irradiated version of that camera. And that brings us to the size and weight question. Is this a camera you want to walk around town with? It's heavy. It's big, it's heavy. If that sort of thing doesn't bother you, then you're in great shape with either of these cameras. I mentioned before that feature set is the same, and for the most part it is. There are some very, very small differences. This has an autofocus illuminator, this does not. I do not have an autofocus problem with these cameras. They're not great in low light, but I don't know, every camera is going to fail at some point in low light or in certain situations. I don't have a problem with the burst speed with these cameras. No, they're not fast. I'm not a sports shooter. I'm not a big wildlife shooter. So I don't feel like I've ever missed a shot for either of those reasons. If those are important to you, then maybe you shouldn't be going medium format, because medium format is simply going to be a slower way of shooting than what you might be used to. But you're not going to be able to find a feature difference that makes one of these cameras better than another. Both cameras offer a full range of Fuji's, or the same range of Fuji's excellent film simulations and all of the other features that you're used to if you have seen the XT series. They also both offer in-camera focus stacking, what Fuji calls focus bracketing, and I think that's very important to include on these medium format cameras where you're often struggling with depth of field. You think of focus stacking as something that you only use when you're doing macro work. No, I use it a lot for landscape shooting. Maybe I'm shooting very wide, shooting along a fence going into the horizon or something like that. Being able to automatically stack 3 or 4 images is really handy. Both these cameras can do that. Both of these cameras offer a range of aspect ratios. Now, obviously, if you're buying into this level of camera, you're probably a RAW shooter, as am I. I shoot exclusively RAW. But on the Fuji cameras, if you shoot RAW plus JPEG, you can go in and pick another aspect ratio, and it will show you that aspect ratio in your viewfinder. What's more, the RAW file that you bring in will be the full RAW file, but it will be tagged with the crop of that JPEG that you chose. So it's a great way to shoot different aspect ratios, be able to visualize those in the field through the viewfinder, come home and actually have your file already there. If you don't like that aspect ratio, you're not giving anything up because the entire file is there. This camera offers both of these cameras offer a range of aspect ratios, including 65 to 24 or something like that. I love this aspect ratio. It's this super wide aspect ratio that I had never really thought about, that I shoot a lot with. There are just a lot of little nice amenities about both of these cameras. So, $1,000 difference. Do you need to spend $1,000 more on this camera? I don't know how to answer that question. There is not a single feature that I can point to that I would say, yes, that feature is worth $1,000. Is there a mess of features that add up to a $1,000 difference? Boy, there are a lot of differences in either direction. Things that I like and don't like. Again, I like the side-loading battery here. I like the ring around the shutter speed dial here. I'll get really nitpicky. This is how nitpicky I can go. I much prefer the camera strap on the 50S. A lot of people complain about it. I don't understand why. What I love about it is I can take the strap off so quickly. Again, I think I use this a lot as a studio camera. But even for landscape work, when I put this on a camera, I want to get rid of the strap. I can do that very quickly. Is that worth $1,000? Absolutely not. I feel like, though there is a weight difference between these two cameras, it's not a $1,000 weight difference. And oddly enough, I feel like the GFX is lighter when I'm carrying it around. Not on my shoulder, but when I'm carrying it in my hand. This hand grip means you don't have to grip the camera as hard. This, I feel like I really need to hold on to it because it's heavy and I'm worried about dropping it. So the weight and size difference is not really there. This is a better looking camera. This camera has a nicer finish on it. Honestly, Fuji's created a real problem here. If money is no obstacle, then you need to get your hands on both cameras and see if you have a personal reaction to one over the other. If you know that you are only going to be shooting in a studio and you make a living shooting in a studio and you want to go medium format and you've decided on Fuji, then I would say go with the 50S. The side-mounted battery, the side-mounted tethering, the fact that the viewfinder offers an additional axis. Both cameras have a viewfinder that can do this. The 50S can also do that. That can be really handy if you've got the camera in an odd place in your studio and you're trying to see the LCD screen. On the 50S, this pops up and allows you to put on a vertical viewfinder. I don't really know why you do that if you've got the LCD screen. So if you're a studio shooter exclusively, this is a better way to go. If money is an obstacle, if you are already struggling to afford one of these cameras, then go with the 50R and know that you are not sacrificing image quality or features. In either case, This is a big investment, and the differences in these cameras are very personal and they're very tactile. You need to get your hands on them. So you need to get to a camera store that has both, handle them for a while, take your own media card, shoot some images so you can go home and feel that dynamic range that's built into these cameras. If you don't have a camera store that has them, most of the rental houses, online rental houses like Rent Glass and Borrow Lenses, offer these cameras now. So that's an easy way to get your hands on them and try them out. If you would like to know more about medium format shooting, she's completely dozed off. She is just out cold. If you would like to know more about medium format shooting, I have a course on LinkedInLearning.com, formerly Lynda.com, wherein I look at this whole entry-level market. We compare the Fujis to the Pentax 645, the Hasselblad, the Canon 50 megapixel, the Sony 40 megapixel. We do a lot of large format printing so you can really see what difference is like in the real world. Links to those are down below, so check those out. In the meantime, I got to figure out what to do with this bird that has fallen asleep in my hand.